Hi, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're watching from at the moment. And thank you very much for joining us here today for GA4's Inevitable. Are you ready to leverage its insights? I've been involved in digital marketing for over 20 years now. And I can say confidently that I can count on one hand, at least in the last 12 to 15 years, as many times as there's been this much excitement, this much even fear, and this much buzz around something disrupting our market. And right now, there's not a lot of great information. We know because we were looking for it when this first came out. And so we've had to learn from scratch, certainly working with our partners over at Google, but to figure out how do we define the measurement strategies that we can draw insights from and that our clients can draw those insights from. And we wanted to open that up to you all. And hopefully you can start setting not just a GA4 installation, but really that smart measurement strategy around everything and leveraging that everything that GA4 has to offer to you. And we're very lucky today. We have an awesome group of speakers. We have Dan Walsh, a really great mind and a great partner of Dom's. Excited to bring him to you today directly from Google. And then Steve D'Angelo and Dana Schumacher are at the forefront of GA4 and being able to put together, again, those strategies and the actual implementation that makes sense to drive insight. So very excited that you're able to hear from them. I don't need to tell you about Google, but this is the mandatory part of the presentation, 30 seconds or less, where I tell you about Dom. We are a top 200 premier Google partner. We're also a diamond level HubSpot provider, and we've helped clients on every populated continent drive quality traffic to their websites and help them convert that traffic into leads and into sales. And I encourage you, there's some logos there at the bottom if you want to check us out on Clutch or on G2 or even on our Google review sites. You can read over 80 reviews of what clients have said about working with us, what they've liked, what they haven't liked. And just a little bit about that Google Premier Partner Program. Being in the top 3% of agencies that we work with, there's a lot of benefits that our clients get. And those also include being able to bring in a great resource like Dan from Google here to talk with everybody today. So want to leave enough time to have a chance for our speakers to go through everything. And just a housekeeping note, please ask questions at any time. You have that opportunity to do it through the chat or through the Q&A. We will be monitoring those. If it is something where maybe you didn't understand the person, then we would go ahead and interrupt and have them go ahead and clarify any kind of statement. But for the rest of the questions, we're going to go ahead and hold those to the end and answer them at that time. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dan Walsh from Google. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for the warm intro there. I will share my screen here now. So yes, thank you for having me. I try and bring the best of what Google has to offer to our agency partners and clients. One thing I don't do a good job of bringing is my technology ability on Zoom. So thanks again for bearing with me. I've been at Google for just over 3.5 years, and I have worked with plenty of partners and agencies. And I will say that Dom brings the best and brightest minds, and thank you for having me. It's something that I don't get to do often, especially here during the pandemic, is engage with clients, even through screens. So looking forward to doing this. So one thing I will say before I get into this is there is a ton of content on Universal Analytics on GA4. So I'm only going to scratch the surface here. Like Justin said, please ask any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. And you will likely have questions that are going to be deeper questions and concerns about the content here. We can follow up with that, and Justin's team can follow up. But this is not going to be an in-depth dive. I'll give you the why it's important. And as you can see from the agenda here, the benefits, cross-platform data unification, and then predictive analytics and the analysis hub, which is in a new imagination from Universal Analytics to GA4. So Justin, if you want to click to the next, we'll get into it. So why upgrade, right? This is very important. Right, and my Google Home is telling me someone's at our doorbell, so apologies. So the future of analytics is coming. It's here. We've launched it. It's something new that a lot of people are interested in, having a lot of questions around. So a couple things, if you could take away one piece of information from what I'm about to say, is you should have Google Analytics and Universal Analytics up and running together concurrently for as long as possible. The sunsetting is July 2023, so the sooner you can get it up, the more information you'll have, the better prepared you'll be for the future. The future of analytics, we are investing time and money and resources in how that's going to play out for the foreseeable future, and there will be no more investment in further features in Universal Analytics. GA4 will eventually become your source of truth, and it's built with machine learning and AI included, and you should begin collecting this data now so your organization can benefit from it in the future. The innovations will leverage exclusive features that you'll start to see more of throughout the 9 months, especially in the migration area, and how you can implement GA4 alongside Universal Analytics. The business impact on machine learning and modeling that's available in GA4 will be far superior than what we have in Universal Analytics. And this is meant to actually utilize the data in a very impactful way moving forward, as opposed to just giving you a lot of data and you figuring out what to do with it. Google Analytics 4 will offer solutions to problems such as, first-party cookie scarcity, as well as third-party cookie deprecation that will take place in 2023. So all these features are meant to work together. They're all meant to really improve the environment in your analytical mindset to implementing those across the board for your marketing plans. So next up we have event-based future, and you can actually skip 2 ahead, Justin. And we'll jump into just what the difference is here in general, right? So this is very simple, but in the old Universal Analytics, it was session-based, right? Everything happened on sessions and the hit type was included. In this new world, which is why we needed to really reinvent the GA4 or Universal Analytics into GA4, is now it's really based on events, right? So events allow us to do a lot of things with reporting and a lot more things with your actionable activities around GA4, as opposed to just taking that data and utilizing it in a small set. Now, once all the migration tools are up and running, you're going to be able to implement this in the same capacity with greater flexibility, greater predictive modeling, and greater analysis for the future. So the other big change is that now it will be used for web and it will be used for app. So that's something that we couldn't just change Universal Analytics. That's why we needed a fully reinvented GA4 to understand both of those independently or both of them together. So in the next slide, you will see how it can become more custom just really quickly. So if you want to go to the next slide, Justin, we have a couple, the 2 that you see up top do not require any additional code. And then the 2 below it require a little bit more code. They're a little bit more in-depth and detailed. So automatically collected data events and enhanced measurement events, those will automatically be included, and these will further enhance the analytical mindset that you have going into the GA4 dashboard, and then how you can pull them out of it. So when you get into the recommended events, those are predetermined events that Google has selected for you, but you can now customize a little bit of them here and there and how you want to pull in certain events. And then the custom events, which is optional to do, and there's no predetermined lists that are created, and you go in and you create all of those from soup to nuts, and those can be really, really detailed, but they require a lot more investment on the front end. So the automatically collected events and then the enhanced measurement events, those are what we think everyone will utilize right from the start, and then you can get a little bit more granular further down the road with recommended events and custom events. So next, we just want to talk about the blended app and web with event-based data collection. That was a handful. So as you can see on the left, the hit types now are individual events, right? So that's page view, social, transaction, app screen view, all of those are now events themselves. So for example, in Universal Analytics, event has a category, action, and label and its own hit type. Now with GA4, we don't have that. Because of this new event-based, everything is categorized as its own event. And that really helps with the reporting in the future. So the Google for Analytics for properties combines mobile app and website data for unified reporting across the board. And it'll be much simpler in a unified UI, as I'll get to in a minute here. This can be used for website, app, both website and app together. So you go to the next one, Justin. Sorry, I just added that last little note there. Cross-platform data unification. So the three key measurements you'll see here at the bottom are conversion modeling, similar audience modeling, and behavior modeling. But what we want to really understand and talk about first is user ID, right? This is something that's not new from Universal Analytics, and we've really doubled down on what the user ID functionality will be like. User ID is a way for you to provide your own identifiers for cross-site and cross-platform measurement for your users. And with this, typically, this would be the identifier that you generate for users when they sign up, and then you use that to pull all of your reporting in. The other element for all these, for three of these use cases, is integration to Chrome's privacy sandbox, which I'm sure everyone's read about. And this is, the beginning of the cookie deprivation that Google is putting a big emphasis behind. So these use cases have the ability to onboard your first-party data as identifiers as well, which is a big component if there is an opportunity for our clients and partners to ingest that first-party data. The conversion measurements, the audience activation, and the user journey measurements, those are the three things that will employ modeling to augment all of these capabilities. When we introduce conversion modeling to model cases where conversion events cannot be deterministically connected with previous engagement events. So in this new cookieless world that is in our near future, being able to use those type of conversions for modeling is very important. And then we obviously want to take that and utilize audience activations for similar audience, and it helps you extend your reach of first-party data. And then user journey measurement. This is really important because, we have behavior modeling that will help supply information and data for your marketing and your advertising budgets. And at the end of the day, these models will be trained on observable data from users who have been logged in, and we've seen their activities. So all of these things together, after the proper, I should say that all these will be observable and modeled after users that have given their proper granted consent. So all of these together really show and highlight the importance of the user ID options and integrations that we'll be using, as you can see here on the slide. So the next slide just brings it all together. User ID will be the most important part, right? You can create your own persistent IDs for signed in users. This is really the definition of what our new event-based model looks like, because these user IDs will be most of the data that we're using. The future identifiers need to be first party. User ID is so important moving forward, and for the first time, marketers can now stitch together all three of these with user ID leading the charge. Google Signals is data from users who are signed into Google, and when we take that data of those signed in users that have given their consent, we can then stitch that together with user ID. And those two signals are the most important and the strongest. And then the device ID, which used to be more important, is becoming less important. And it's becoming less important only because of the event-based modeling that we are going to have now moving forward, as opposed to sessions. Now that we can use websites and apps, the device is less important in that formula, and we really will utilize user IDs, which is something that needs to be set up at first, but user IDs will be by far the most important opportunity to deduplicate and reach users across devices and platforms. So that summarizes our cross-platform, and then I just want to talk a little bit. I think I'm doing okay on time here. So just wanted to give a time check. So real fast here, all of this is encompassed in protecting user privacy first and foremost. But marketers need solutions to address the industry challenges that are still going to exist with or without the addition of GA4. So less than half of firms, only 43%, say they have a good understanding of their cross-platform by web and app view of their data. So that's really important. Now moving forward, we're going to be able to really make that number even larger, so that gap will be smaller. By closing this gap, organizations can now focus on dismantling the silos that they have in their data and now actually using cross-platform analytics to utilize their data for the important parts of their business. Predictive analytics is something that marketers can also use the capabilities for, because they haven't been able to do this in the past. And those organizations that use AI and machine learning, they'll benefit even more, because you have the potential to make marketing faster, more relevant, and less manual as these predictive analysis and analytics become even more prominent. Customer journey is really important, because many brands struggle with how users move throughout their site when they move between apps. And I'm sure everyone has heard this example, especially on the e-commerce side. Someone looks up your product on their commute, or pre-pandemic days in their commute on the bus, and then they talk to their family at home when they get home, or their roommates or friends, and then they make that conversion a couple days later on their desktop. It's really important for everyone to understand customer experiences across all the touch points, and GA4 is going to be able to break those silos down. And then lastly, it's really important, obviously, to activate on your data. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of GA4 is now being able to link that to your Google Ads account. And then once the migration tools are all set up and it's acting in similar fashion, it's really, really important to activate on the media aspect of the data, because data in a silo isn't going to do any good. So it's really important to make sure all of that is properly linked. And then, like I said before, this all is in the ecosystem of protecting our users and our privacy. So that's really like how the solutions will address challenges in the future. And then there's just a little bit of a further description of this on the next slide on the predictive analysis side. So we use machine learning for purchase probability, churn probability, and revenue prediction. So I think you can read through this, and there's a ton of additional content on this. But I think the biggest part to me is the why of these probability and prediction opportunities. So you can optimize the flow of your website with purchase probability. That's really important for clients with business challenges where they're just not really sure like how to squeeze more juice from those lemons. When you optimize the flow of your website, you can put things in places that allow for your customers to have a better user experience, and then obviously hopefully increase conversions as well. The churn probability is really important, because how do you get someone in the past 7 days who might have made a conversion or had made a purchase on your website? How do you make sure that they don't fall into the churn probability category, and how do you make sure you keep them engaged? And this is what purchase probability is also going to have an influence on. And then revenue prediction is what are all those expected conversions within the next 28 days from a user that has been active in the last 28 days. And everyone wants to know this, right? As you look at forecasting models, as you look at future outcomes, especially for seasonality predictions and such. So this is I think a really important part that's going to then influence your audiences and analysis. A predictive audience includes at least one condition based on the predictive metrics above. So it's something that as these migration tools start to evolve, and as you have the dual setup, you will start to play around with these, and that's what the long migration window of 12 months of having both products up and running is going to be able to do for our GA4 users. Is they're going to be able to test these things in the GA4 world and the ecosystem and that environment be able to make sure that they're getting even more opportunities out of the product itself. So I have only one or two more slides, and I know I'm touching in a territory of over speaking. I'm in sales, so I like to talk, but I will, curb my final slides here a little bit. So these last 2 or 3 slides are really around the analysis and the analytical aspect of it. But takeaway here for Google Signals is you can segment and use demographics in a predictive way that configure the audience builder, and then have that impact on whatever platform or screen or product you would essentially use in Google Ads, which is what I just mentioned about making sure all of those connections into Google Ads are active, because you want them to be actionable within a space that you're trying to either increase leads or close a new business on the e-com side. And then the last 2 slides here are just talking about the simplicity now with our analysis hub, and the simplicity of the reporting. We have all of our reports are nice and easy in the UI. It's going to be clean, a much easier experience. You will be able to drill down like way more than you used to in the past, which is going to be a huge benefit, especially when you start segmenting out those events in a way that makes sense for your business. The second bullet there, explore, which is also called exploration. This is going to have improved capabilities. It's going to have drag and drop features. Now you can analyze how various segments intersect, which is huge, especially now that we're using these events and we're using web and app. So lots to be learned here. Hence, again, the long lead cycle in being able to have both tools up and running for your use for the next 9 to 12 months. So. And then last commitment here to Analysis Hub, why to use it. I think that's really the most important part for the visualization. If you want to go to the next slide, Justin. It's fast, it's flexible, as you can see there. The point is that it's really easy to use, and most importantly of that, it's really easy to make business decisions based on GA4. I think that's one thing that I've been pleasantly surprised with, how helpful GA4 is now to make business decisions for our small business clients out there that are depending on this type of data to make really important critical business decisions. There is a Think with Google. If you don't subscribe to that blog, there's just random posts that come out across all things Google, and one of them with McDonald's recently, just about how they used their reporting structure to really drill down into the information. Now, I get it, McDonald's is a huge brand, and they have a lot of resources and tools, but just utilizing the tool to something in a level that they weren't able to utilize in the past shows just how helpful the tool can be for everyone in the future. And then lastly, last slide is collecting data with dual setup. I just want to make one more final plug with this, because it's really important to have both of these set up at the same time. You're going to really benefit from a dual setup implementation. This way you can learn, the system itself can learn, you can set up reporting, you can utilize that reporting in the best way you see fit. And really you don't have to, you can break something in GA4 and still have universal analytics, but come next year, next July, when this is sunset, you're not going to have that ability. And I know for a fact that this is a big lift to have both of these products up and running at the same time. So there have been some people that have asked, hey, do you think that's going to be extended or pushed? I would really be, I'm not on the analytical team, but I would be really surprised if they ever did push it. And I don't think there's any plans to push it, because it's a big lift for both teams to manage each of these products at the same time. So with that said, plenty of time to still have data up and running and play with it over the next, I think, 11 months now, 12 months. So make sure you get it up and running. And if you have any questions, there's plenty of resources on our on the Google Google Help articles. And hopefully you found this helpful for you all for at least the why. And I know that the DOM team is going to be able to give a lot of details on how to implement and execute.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Really appreciate that, and sticking with us through our technology challenges. And all the information was great. But I really appreciate especially your perspective on Google really is very, very, very unlikely to move the date. We've seen that in the past, sometimes with Google where things get pushed, but the way you explained it, what kind of internal resources that causes for the Google team really makes it clear that that is our hard cutoff.
Yeah, I would say the dates that get moved in the past have been around, product usage and adoption out in the space. And I think with the year timeline, I think they're really hoping that it's a firm date. So
awesome. Well, thank you very much. And with that, by the way, thank you for all your questions. Dana has been a champion, Johnny on the spot going through and answering questions. We're also going to take those and answer those for the group as well at the end. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Steve D'Angelo.
Great. Thanks so much, Justin. And Dan, thank you so much for walking through that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very, very excited to talk about GA4. In fact, I'm so excited about GA4. Justin had to reach out to me before and make sure I was going to stay within my time requirements, because if he didn't do that, I would have you here for at least 6 hours talking through every technical aspect of GA4. As Dan spoke to earlier, there's a lot to get through. So what we've tried to do here is to summarize what I believe are the most important aspects of GA4 that you need to know in order to ensure that you're getting the most out of your GA4 implementation. This is a subject that we're really passionate about at Dawn, because we view this as a huge opportunity for businesses to not just take what Universal Analytics did and apply it to GA4, but to truly redefine their analytics and to maximize the insights they provide. So without further ado, let's get into it by starting with GA4 out-of-the-box tracking. So Dan already covered this before. There's a lot out-of-the-box tracking with Google. So I'd just like to start by clarifying two seemingly opposing points with GA4 and explain how they both actually can be true. So the first is that Google Analytics 4 provides far more out-of-the-box tracking capabilities than Universal Analytics, as you can see from the two screenshots there. And second, organizations will almost always have to go beyond out-of-the-box tracking if they want to implement a comprehensive measurement to maximize GA4. So the first recommendation I'll share is just to look beyond out-of-the-box tracking and to embrace custom events when planning your GA4. And we'll dig into the many reasons why in the coming slides, but before we explain why, we need to dig into the first question, which is, what's in the box? Or more specifically, what exactly are you getting out of the box of GA4? I promise it's much better than what Brad Pitt's character gets in this scene. Like I said, Google's providing amazing, amazing insights up front. And it's an excellent foundation to start your tracking. But let's get into what it actually includes. And I know Dan touched on this a little bit earlier, so I'll go through this pretty quick. But when we talk about out-of-the-box tracking, as Dan spoke to, we're talking about automatic events and enhanced measurement events. We're basically going to group them together for the purposes of this discussion, because essentially automatic events are going to be available from the get-go out of the box. Enhanced measurement pretty much are, just with the added benefit of you can tweak within the GA4 interface certain settings, as you can see from that screenshot on the right. So let's take an actual look at some of these insights you can get out of the box. One of the most common ones I get is page views. So it's one of the most frequently asked questions. In fact, I've actually had people reach out to Dawn directly who have done their own GA4 implementation that have reached out and say, hey, are we not measuring page views anymore? Where can I find page views? So the first thing up front is, I promise page views still exist. They're still present. They're just being measured a little bit differently, kind of like how Dan had spoke to how sessions are being measured differently. Again, everything's an event. So you can actually navigate, just for your own information, to page views in a standard report just by going to reports, then into life cycle, then into engagement, then into page and screens. There's no longer a metric called page view. It's been replaced by the views metric. And just so you give you an idea of kind of how the event-based model works, you can see here in this example, the total number of views, 380,255, is the same number as the event count column over there that's pulling in page views. Again, everything is an event. Getting further here, another example would be outbound link clicks. So this would be another example of a useful insight you'd want, because, for example, let's say you were to look at your page view report and found that a large number of exits are coming from your home page. Now, a lot of people, when they end their sessions, they just do it by closing the browser tab, but oftentimes people are clicking a link to go to another web property. So a useful insight would be what pages or what domains are they going to? So here you can actually just see an example from our homepage where the page path and screen class shows you that dimension, that's our homepage. And you can see link domain there is actually all of the domains that they've been clicking from our homepage. You see, for the majority, it's to our social profiles. Finally, let's cover some other examples of questions for out-of-the-box tracking can help you answer. So the first would be file downloads, which is how many times files are downloaded on your site. Second would be site search, what terms users are searching for on your site. Third, which is scrolls, which is how many users reach the 90% threshold on a given page. And finally, video engagements, which is how users interact with embedded YouTube videos. So as you can see, there's a ton of great insights that you can get out of the box with GA4. And it's important to understand what insights you're able to get out of the box, but furthermore, what isn't present here right now. So what I'd invite you all to do is to go ahead and create a list of questions about your site that you want GA4 to help you answer. I would categorize these questions into two groups. First, those that can be answered via out-of-the-box tracking, and those that can't. Identify where your tracking would benefit from a custom implementation. So moving on here, why you must move beyond out of the box. So as I said before, Google is providing a ton of great insights out of the box. Part of the ways that it's able to do that is it relies on a bunch of common elements that are present across most websites or most apps. This is a great foundation, but Google can't possibly plan for every contingency, every different aspect of every website. So let's go ahead and think through some examples of questions that you want answered that GA4 out of the box, unfortunately, isn't going to be able to provide. The first would be form submissions, which is just simply some questions around which forms are being filled out most often, which forms have the highest conversion rate, and which forms or CTAs are performing best, which form offers rather. Some other things would be custom elements that are specific to your site. For example, how are users engaging with a chatbot on the site? Another would be where are users dropping off in a multi-step quiz? This is something we see, especially in healthcare. We will see a lot of times, you may have a symptom tracker, or you may have a questionnaire where it's a multi-step form. You want to be able to identify where people are abandoning in that. You can get a ton of great insights from a custom event implementation. And finally, e-commerce. I know it came up in the chat earlier. Unfortunately, there isn't anything out of the box currently that's going to be able to track for e-commerce, but there are some obviously valuable questions we'd want answered there, such as which products are generating the most revenue and how many users are abandoning their cart. So moving on here, you see that every business and every website is unique, and that means that every analytics implementation must be unique as well. There's no way to go ahead and capture everything, all the context needed for every website out of the box. So to implement analytics in a way that's tailored to your business's unique needs, custom events, custom dimensions, and custom metrics are pretty much a necessity. So our key point that we want you to take away here is that the key is to make your analytics look like your organization and not the other way around. Someone much smarter than me, an analyst much more experienced than me, actually had this quote on a Google marketing podcast episode. As Dan said, there's a ton of great GA4 resources out there, especially through Google. I welcome you guys to go ahead and check those out because it's a ton of awesome insights you can get from them. But the real point we're trying to make here is that GA4's event-based collection model allows for a more flexible, scalable, and customizable implementation. But GA4 is not simply an enhancement to UA. It's an entirely new product, and it's an entirely new data model. So instead of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole by trying to recreate your universal analytics in GA4, what I invite you all to do is to look at this as an opportunity to redefine your analytics by asking, how can we customize GA4 to best fit our unique business needs so we can take full advantage of this opportunity? So we've identified all the great things you can get from GA4 out of the box and why you have to go further. Let's get into some examples of custom events in GA4. So GA4's event-based model, and I know Dan had touched on this earlier, but just to go through, to recap what he'd gone through, Universal Analytics is a session-based data model. So within a session, UA collects and stores various interactions, which it calls hits. Those hits are grouped within a session. These sessions are the foundations of UA reporting, hence why everyone here that has been in Universal Analytics has reported on sessions countless times. And it's so prominently featured in the tool because it's built into the model. Where GA4's event-based model works is each interaction or each hit is processed into a standalone event. So to put it simply, everything gets an event. Oprah's reaction is actually similar to my reaction when I realized the implications of an event-based model. I've said implementation too many times already. It's just coming out. But you see, if previously analysts like myself had to go ahead and collect everything in the standard event fields where there's only event category, action, and label. So as a result, we would end up having to fit multiple dimensions into a single field. We would sometimes use workarounds like hit scope custom dimensions, but even that had its limitations because there's only 20 user scope custom dimensions you were able to have in Universal Analytics per property. So you really had to use them sparingly and you really had to future-proof it. So we'll get into that a little bit deeper, but first let's get you familiar with just some event-related terms. And again, I know Dan had covered some of this, but by now you're probably familiar with what events are in GA4. They're user interactions such as page views, button clicks. Some are tracked out of the box, but again, our perspective is the most useful events need to be implemented via GTM or hard-coded by a developer. Event parameters, which I don't think we've touched on yet. Basically, these are additional pieces of metadata that can add context to each and every event. For example, parameters can be used to describe the value of a purchase or provide context into the where, how, and why an event was logged. And finally, user properties. These are attributes of a user collected during an event and scoped as a user custom dimension. Dan mentioned this earlier, how important user ID is. Another would be client ID, or another example would be logged in event, or if you perhaps have a subscription-based model, what the subscription tier of the person is who logged in. So now that we've defined our terms, let's take a look at how this model actually provides us the flexibility and the customizability that we've been talking about. So we'll first start with the limitations of UA. At this point, we've all grown accustomed to category, action, and label. And while this structure is super useful and we're all very used to it at this point, we've all constructed naming conventions through it. It's still somewhat rigid because, again, it only limits us to 3 terms. And as I alluded to earlier, you have people like me who are trying to cram as much information as possible into those 3 fields. So you end up concatenating different fields or combining them in there to try to get the most out of them. So again, additional information was available via custom dimensions, but even those had its limits. So the ideal solution, and really what people like me wanted from UA for so long, would be if we could add additional fields to the event as needed to collect the data. And that's actually exactly what GA4 allows you to do. When we get into event action, category, label, in GA4, they actually do not exist. In fact, the only standard field for an event is event name. But this is actually part of what makes GA4's model so awesome, because instead of trying to capture all the needed information and try to jam them into those 3 standard fields, we can collect additional event data via event parameters, which are additional pieces of metadata that can add context to each event. Let's take a closer look at the differences between UA and GA4's event tracking. So event parameters, like I said before, they're these additional pieces of information. You can kind of think of them like event category, action, and label on steroids. While we previously only had the 3 fields, you can now add up to 25 event parameters on any event in GA4. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, UA, you just said you could have 20 event parameters, so that doesn't seem like too big of a difference. But notice I said up to 25 per event, because you can actually have up to 50 registered as user scope custom dimensions, or excuse me, event scope custom dimensions within GA4. So what I would just invite you all to do is to think of, for every interaction on your site, if you can track up to 25 different dimensions for each of those interactions, what pertinent data you'd be able to get. There's just collecting this much, these many additional granular pieces of information can just have huge benefits for your organization. We'll get into a specific example here. Sorry, just checking on my time. A common thing we see is that organizations will have countless forms, use building different form builders with different offers, and they're speaking to different parts of the funnel scattered across their main site and also their subdomains. So let's say in this hypothetical that we're talking about a SaaS company, which is using multiple form builders. For this example, we'll say Gravity Forms and HubSpot Forms. And they're using multiple offers that the business values differently. So we have things such as demo requests, free trials, gated white papers, and newsletter signups. Those are speaking to different parts of the funnel and likely are going to be valued by the organization differently. So let's just take a minute and think about this scenario and ask yourself what additional pieces of information we can collect to help inform the decision-making here. First one would probably be useful would be knowing the actual, which form they're filling out. The easiest way to do that would be a form ID and passing that through. And that's actually super useful for data unification, which Dan was touching on earlier. So if you wanted to actually combine your GA data based on what form they're filling out and relate that back to your CRM or your marketing automation, by having that form ID present in both platforms, you'll be able to match them up together. Another one would be simply which form builder was used. Again, super useful if you're trying to relate it back to your CRM or marketing integration data. And finally, it would be useful to understand what the offer was. This is super critical because it can help you segment your higher value conversion actions, those that are worth more to your business, from more higher funnel but lower value micro conversions, like maybe a newsletter sign up might be for some companies. That actually lets you go ahead also within the platform segment conversions out. So let's say for your unique business needs, you didn't want to track a newsletter sign up as an actual conversion in GA4. By being able to segment and break them out this way, you can actually choose which offers you're going to define as conversions within GA4. And this is actually just an example of us doing it within Google Tag Manager. As you can see here, we have two separate ones, one for HubSpot, one for Gravity Forms, and we're collecting the element ID, the form type, and the form offer on all of those as defined in Google Tag Manager. So while GA4 is certainly more flexible than prior iterations, there are still some rules and guidelines you have to take into account when planning out your GA4 property. The first is there's aspects such as reserved names, reserved event parameters, and user properties. You have to plan these out beforehand. These reserved names are essentially names that GA4 has already predefined for a purpose. As Dan touched on, recommended event, enhanced measurement events, automatic events. None of those names can be repurposed because it would there'd be a duplicate element there. Second off, you're also limited to 50 event scope custom dimensions in your GA4 properties. So while that is significantly more than what you have in UA, you'd be surprised at how quickly you can use them up if you're not really thinking and planning them out beforehand. So just to get a great example of this would be, well, first off, what we would do is we'd recommend that you need to unify your parameter naming convention up front. And what this allows you to do, this allows you to reuse the same term in multiple areas. So a great example of this would be if instead of creating a click ID and a form ID, for example, you could just create an event parameter called an element ID. That way, you can use it in instances where a click ID is used as the click ID, and you can use it whenever a form is submitted, interacted with in any way as the form ID. It's just little things like that that'll make that makes GA4 even more flexible and really gives you a future-proof implementation that doesn't just look great in the first week of data, but can work in the foreseeable future as well. Finally, there's character lengths, names and values of events and parameters. These are also limited, as you can kind of see from the table on the right there. Fortunately, there are workarounds in Google Tag Manager and contingencies you can put in there just to make sure that you're not exceeding those limits so you're not missing any data. And as you can see, with all the considerations with collection limits related to events and event parameters, it really is critical that you plan your analytics up front to ensure that it's future-proof, to ensure that it's going to deliver for your organization. If you don't plan for these contingencies up front, this is where you really may have to pivot down the road. And that's obviously something we all want to avoid. So the next logical question is, how do you actually plan for your analytics? And that's what we'll get on in this last section here. Before we do, the last piece here is that a DOM key takeaway is mapping your events and parameters before implementing is critical for a stable and future-proof GA4. So again, what you need to do is to plan ahead and to use consistent naming conventions and avoid collection limits. Finally, getting started with GA4, planning your analytics. So I'm seeing I'm running up against time here, so I'll get through this as quick as I can. The first thing we recommend is when getting started with GA4 is to develop a measurement strategy. We recommend using a SMART goal framework. When doing this, we want it to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive. So the measurement strategy at a high level consists of 4 components. The first would be identifying business goals, because analytics is about helping your business improve and reach your goals. Really, the best way to do this is to assemble stakeholders from different lines of business and basically coming together and aligning on what are the key goals for either a line of business and the overarching web property. Second would be identifying website goals. And in this example here, we're talking about examples of goals could be selling products or services or generating leads. Second here, identifying website goals. Think of this as what your website objectives are. A couple examples of that would be, again, using those sell products or generate leads example. It would be things such as increasing your conversion rate on a form, or maybe getting, for generate leads, more content downloads for gated content. Third would be defining KPIs, which is answering the questions of how are you going to measure if we're reaching our goals? We need to generate meaningful metrics or KPIs for both our examples. And finally, setting targets. Let's say we've done all of these other steps here. I'm reporting to you at the end of the month, we had 500 leads. If we don't set our targets up front, we can't gauge our performance and whether or not we're doing well or if we need to improve. So finally, getting into create a tag implementation plan. Again, this is something that it's a more technical version essentially of the measurement strategy. What we're trying to do is speak to all of the different parts of your analytics implementation. And really what this helps you do is this can be a living, breathing document that can be updated as needed. So if you've gone ahead, done your initial implementation and there's a website redesign or you're adding new aspects to your site next year that requires more events to be tracked, you have this standard key showing you where everything lies, what your naming convention is, and also what your event parameters are named. That way, what you're able to do is, again, having unified, consistent naming conventions, we can compare back. The other thing you can do here is identify what is being tracked as a conversion and what the actual name of that tag is, the trigger it fires on, and all the parameters that are associated with it. Finally, an implementation checklist. You should consult a robust GA4 checklist as you go through your implementation that covers all property settings, configurations, and applicable integrations to avoid any kind of oh shoot moments. Lucky for everyone on this call, you will all be receiving DOM's official GA4 checklist. This will be super helpful in walking you through planning, property settings, different settings within a data stream and data collection, events and conversions, and also link to applicable integrations and just other considerations such as user IDs and audiences. And this leads us to our final DOM key takeaway, which is to make sure to complete a comprehensive measurement strategy and tag implementation plan before starting any GA4 development. Consult your GA4 checklist while you're implementing to ensure GA4 success. So again, to recap, DOM key takeaways here. Create a And sorry, we're at 152. So these will all be included in the slides at the end here. And I'll just leave them all up on the screen here. Want to make sure we get to the Q&A section. So thank you all for participating, and I'll hand it back over to Justin.
Hey, awesome. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. This is your sales pitch portion of the show for 20 seconds. If you are interested in getting a one-on-one GA4 measurement strategy with us, we'd love to have a consultation, a free consultation. I'll give away the free strategy and the implementation, but give you that consultation for free. Go to directom.com/GA4. Again, directom.com/GA4, or contact us at 800-979-3177. Now, with that, let's open up to questions. I'll start with a couple first that we saw came through. And Dana, thank you so much for handling the chat and answering so many of those questions live. The first one was, will slides be shared afterwards? Yes, we're actually going to send you 3 things. Number 1, a recording of this webinar. Number 2, we'll send you both sets of slides from Dan as well as from Steve. And then third, as Steve mentioned at the end, we are going to send you a GA4 implementation checklist. So you are going to get all of those things after this webinar. I'm going to pick out a few of the ones that some of these I felt like were kind of answered throughout the course. Maybe they were asked before we got to that section, but ones I want to make sure we touch on. Kind of a basic one here, but it's important because I think a lot of people have this question. Any data loss when running GA4 and UA concurrently?
I can jump in there. There's actually definitely no data loss, and it's actually best practice to run UA and GA4 together until UA retires. So definitely no data loss there.
Awesome. Thanks, Dana. And then I'm going to read this one. It's a little bit longer. And I thought it was really, really good and was not something that would be easy for you to type in the chat. I've found, this is from Aaliyah Sanders, I have found reporting and analytics in GA4 to be extremely difficult, especially for drilling down into specific data like traffic sources and behavior. For example, what is our most popular blog post page, or how many people come to our site from LinkedIn ads? What's the best place to learn?
I'll start with all of the resources that Google Ads Help articles provide. I think we do have honestly, like a lot of the questions that I have for myself, I Google. I know that sounds very odd, but I Google them to see what type of resources we have externally. And then I use that to see if there's any additional resources internally. I will say that there are more resources that are going to be available in the coming months around measurements, reporting, and especially around migration of those. So you might find this question answered in some type of migration update that comes, especially if you utilize it now. One question that I know we get a lot is, will I be able to do X, Y, and Z in GA4? And what we've looked for is not parity in the product, but parity in the outcome. So we want to make sure it might look a little different, it might function a little different, but if you're using a report right now in Universal Analytics, and that's helpful, you will be able to find that same report in a different way, maybe labeled differently in functionality, because as I said numerous times, this is events-based, not session-based, so it's just going to be organized a little bit differently, but you should be able to have parity on all of the reporting options that you've had with Universal Analytics.
Yeah, and Dan's exactly right. Just to add to that a little bit additionally, I know Dan touched on the exploratory reports. That's if you're having trouble finding something in the actual just native GA4 reports, that's where I'd recommend going. There's actually a lot of templates available through Google that can answer a lot of these common questions. The one caveat there, and shameless plug, is you do have to do a little configuration before all of your event names and parameters are available in there. You have to go ahead and do a couple steps to store them as custom dimensions. Go ahead and take a look at the checklist because that actually lists that on there. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Again, you're probably just going to have trouble getting me off the phone talking about analytics. Happy to answer whatever.
No, thank you both. And I would just also push that we're getting a lot of questions, and as we continue to implement on more and more sites and we run into new things that haven't been encountered yet, we're going to continue to put out a lot of content as well. So I would encourage you definitely sign up either for a newsletter or for just check out our blog, and we're going to be putting more content out there. Andrea had asked if there's any physical book recommendations yet. I'm not aware of any. I didn't know if anybody else on the call was.
No, I mean, the thing I would say is, I mean, Google is very much learning and rolling out, and Dan, I'm sure you can speak to this, obviously, but is rolling out new features, on a week by week, month by month basis. So I'm not sure that anyone would be able to purchase or to publish a book in the near future on GA4.
I will just add to that, in addition to resources that are rolling out, our teams are staffing up appropriately for GA4 resourcing in the future, not just for like our partners like Dom, but externally as well. We have a lot of help center questions that come in through our chats around GA4, around universal analytics, and those specialists in the universal analytics world can't really migrate that information in the same way to GA4. So there will be continued updates and increased information resources provided in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to try to, I think we probably only have time for one more. So this one I'll ask, and by the way, if your question wasn't answered, again, I think Dana got to most of them already in the chat, but feel free to follow up. We're happy to answer any individual questions. So will audience segments be available in GA4? And if so, will they be migrated over at an account level for you?
So
I'll
Dan.
handle the migration, and then Steve, feel free to follow up. Yes, everything that you have access to now will be migrated over. The only caveat I'll say is it might be organized differently. It might not have the exact same term because we can get a little bit more granular. And then most importantly, for business challenges, those will be applicable to like how you activate either media or marketing budgets around how you want to, what's best for your business, I should say.
Cool.
Dan,
Anything
right
that Steve or Dana want to jump in on with that?
Yep, Dan said it all.
Okay, awesome. Well, everybody, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and really awesome questions today. Like we said, we're going to be following up with you. You'll be getting a recording or a copy of this recording that you can listen to and pass around. You'll be getting that free implementation checklist that we're going to be sending over, and we'll send you over the slides as well. And if you need anything further one-on-one, please check us out. Happy to help you. Have an awesome day, everybody. Thanks for joining.